The hall was not very big, but it felt busy that evening. Chairs were placed close together, and the sound of people talking filled the room. Some laughed loudly, some spoke in low voices, and others looked around while checking their phones. It was one of those small community events where people came more to pass time than to feel something deep. In the center of the room stood an old piano. Its black surface showed marks of age, and a few keys were slightly worn, but it still looked strong and ready. Most people believed the piano was there for trained players or invited performers. They expected music that would be pleasant, safe, and familiar. No one imagined that something unexpected was about to happen. The air carried the smell of dust, wood, and light perfume. A few people sat with crossed arms, already looking bored. Others smiled politely, waiting for the next performance to begin. At the back of the room, a little girl stood quietly. She was smaller than most children her age, with simple clothes that looked carefully cleaned but old. Her shoes were worn at the edges, and her hair was tied neatly, as if someone had taken time to make sure she looked presentable. She did not talk. She did not move much. She simply watched the piano. The girl held her hands together, feeling the warmth of the room and the weight of many eyes without fully realizing it. Her face showed calm, but inside, her heart beat fast. She had waited a long time for this moment. Not days or weeks, but years. Still, she did not rush forward. She waited until the room felt right, or maybe until she felt brave enough. When she finally began to walk toward the piano, a few people noticed her. At first, they thought she was lost. Some believed she was going to stand near the piano to watch. Others assumed she would be guided away by an adult. No one expected her to sit at the bench. As she reached the piano, the sound in the room changed. Conversations slowed. A few heads turned. Someone near the front raised an eyebrow. The girl pulled the bench slightly closer, her small hands struggling with its weight. The scraping sound of the bench against the floor made a few people look annoyed. Then she sat down. A soft wave of laughter moved through the room. It was not loud at first. Just quiet chuckles, small smiles, and looks exchanged between people. Some leaned toward each other and whispered. Others shook their heads gently, as if saying this was a mistake. One person smiled and said something under their breath about children these days. Another quietly laughed and lifted a phone, ready to record what they believed would be a funny moment. A few people looked away, already embarrassed for her. The girl did not look up. She sat still on the bench, her feet barely touching the floor. The piano seemed too big for her, almost swallowing her small body. From the outside, she looked fragile, like someone who did not belong there. No one asked her to stop. No one asked her to play. The room simply watched, waiting for her to fail or give up. She placed her hands on her lap and took a slow breath. The noise around her felt far away now. In her mind, the room disappeared. She remembered other rooms, quieter ones. Rooms with cracked walls and weak light. Places where she practiced alone. Places where music was her only escape. Still, the people watching her did not know any of that. They saw only a little girl sitting at a piano meant for adults. They judged her by her size, her clothes, and her silence. They decided the story before it even began. A man near the side whispered, asking why no one was stopping her. A woman nearby smiled in a way that was not kind. Someone else sighed, clearly hoping this moment would pass quickly. The girl slowly lifted her hands from her lap and held them above the keys. Her fingers hovered there, trembling just slightly. She did not rush. She did not smile. She focused. The laughter faded a little, replaced by curiosity. Some people leaned forward. Others crossed their arms tighter. A few still believed they were about to witness something silly. The room fell into an uneasy silence. The girl closed her eyes for a moment. In that quiet second, everything she had carried inside her seemed to rise to the surface. Fear, hope, memory, and something stronger than all of them. She did not think about the people watching. She thought only about the music. Her fingers lowered slowly, touching the keys for the first time. Before any sound came out, a few people smirked, waiting. Someone near the back whispered, almost laughing again. The girl pressed the first key. The sound was soft, simple, almost shy. It did not impress anyone right away. A few people relaxed, believing their earlier thoughts were correct. This was just a child playing around. But the girl continued. Each note followed the next with care. There was no rush, no noise, no mistake. The melody was quiet but steady. It did not beg for attention, yet it slowly pulled it in. People stopped whispering. Some did not even realize when their smiles faded. Others slowly lowered their phones. The sound coming from the piano was not what they expected. Carried feeling, not skill alone. Felt honest. The girl kept her eyes closed, her face calm. Her shoulders relaxed as her fingers moved more freely. The piano no longer looked too big for her. Felt like it belonged to her. By the time the first short melody ended, the room was completely silent. No one laughed now. No one spoke. They listened. And the little girl continued to play, unaware that the story everyone thought they knew was already changing. The room remained silent, though not everyone could understand what they were hearing. Some people still held their doubts, thinking that maybe the girl would make a mistake any moment. Their faces were a mix of disbelief and curiosity, unsure of whether to laugh, clap, or simply look away. The whispers that had filled the air before were gone, replaced by an almost electric tension, like something unexpected was about to happen. The little girl's fingers moved across the keys with careful precision. She did not rush, nor did she play loudly. Every note felt as though it was chosen with purpose. It was not perfect, not in the way a trained adult might be perfect, but it carried a sincerity that made the listeners pay attention. A few people leaned forward, trying to understand the source of this sudden feeling, this quiet power that seemed to rise from her small hands. Some in the audience began to exchange glances, unsure of how to react. The woman who had whispered a laugh earlier now looked embarrassed. She touched her lips, as if to hide the faint smile that had appeared at first, realizing that her amusement had been misplaced. A man near the corner frowned slightly, shaking his head in disbelief. He could not explain why he felt a lump in his throat as he watched the little girl play. The girl's eyes were closed. She did not need to see the audience or the room. All that mattered was the piano, the melody, and the story she wanted to tell. Her hands floated over the keys, sometimes pressing firmly, sometimes gently, creating waves of sound that seemed to rise and fall like the tide. Every note carried a piece of her experience, a memory that had been stored quietly for years. Some people tried to focus on the technical side, analyzing whether her fingers were positioned correctly, whether her posture was good enough. But the music did not allow them to focus on details. It demanded attention to the emotion, to the feeling behind each note. Even those who were skeptical began to notice it, their minds slowly letting go of judgment and opening to the story. The girl's melody grew longer and more complex. She moved her hands faster now, though still with care, and the notes seemed to dance together, forming patterns that were both surprising and comforting. The audience began to feel a strange sense of connection. For some, it was a memory of a piano they had heard long ago. For others, it was a feeling of something they could not name, a mixture of hope, sadness, and admiration. A few children in the audience watched with wide eyes, captivated by the music. They had come expecting an ordinary evening, perhaps a few small performances, and now they were witnessing something that felt bigger than the room itself. One little boy whispered to his parent, pointing at the piano, but the adults shook their head, not wanting to interrupt. Still, their eyes did not leave the girl's hands. The girl did not notice the attention. She was lost in the music, in the notes, in the small spaces between them where meaning existed. She was telling a story without words, and those who listened began to sense what it was. Some felt a soft pain, a memory of loss or struggle. Others felt hope, as though the music was carrying them to a place they had long forgotten. The piano was no longer just an instrument. It was a voice. As the melody continued, the laughter from before seemed like a distant memory. Some adults who had whispered or mocked now looked away, ashamed. They realized they had judged too quickly, not seeing the courage and determination it took for someone so young to sit and play alone in front of strangers. It was easy to laugh at the surface, but the music revealed depth, and it demanded respect. The girl's fingers moved with confidence now. The notes seemed to echo in the room, wrapping around each person differently. A woman near the back wiped her eyes discreetly, not wanting anyone to notice. A man crossed his arms but could not hide the tension in his shoulders, feeling something stir deep inside. Even the people who had been the most skeptical could not escape the pull of the melody. Some parts of the music were soft, almost fragile. Other parts were strong, bold, and full of courage. The girl seemed to know when to hold back and when to let the sound fill the room. The audience began to realize that this was not just playing. It was storytelling. Every pause, every rise and fall of the melody carried meaning. They could feel the history, the practice, the pain, and the hope behind it. A few people leaned closer to the piano, as if trying to understand how such small hands could create such large feelings. One older man, sitting quietly, thought about his own childhood and the dreams he had let go. The music spoke to him in a way that words never could. The little girl was no longer just a child at a piano. She was a messenger, and the piano was her way of speaking to the hearts of everyone present. Time seemed to stretch. The melody did not rush, yet it did not feel slow either. Each note was exactly where it needed to be. The audience felt themselves holding their breath, waiting for what would come next. They had expected a moment of amusement, a passing distraction. Instead, they were caught in a story unfolding in real time. A story made of sound, emotion, and bravery. Some began to remember moments from their own lives, moments they had tried to forget. Others felt a gentle warmth, like a memory of someone they loved. The girl's music was guiding them through feelings they had not expected to face that evening. The room felt smaller and larger at the same time, as if the music had stretched and pulled the space to contain something bigger than the physical walls. The little girl's eyes remained closed, but she seemed to sense the room shifting around her. She did not play for praise or attention. She played because she had to, because the music was part of her. And as she played, the people in the room began to understand that they had been wrong to judge her. She was not there for their entertainment. She was there to share a part of herself, something honest and unfiltered, something that could not be measured by skill alone. The melody shifted again, softer now, more delicate. The tension in the room eased slightly, replaced by a sense of wonder. People exchanged glances, some in awe, some unsure of how to react. They wanted to applaud but felt it would be premature. The girl had more to say, and they did not want to interrupt. They had learned that patience was part of the experience. A few people tried to imagine her life, imagining the hours she had spent practicing alone. The quiet rooms, the small victories, the mistakes, the tears, and the perseverance. They imagined what it must have taken for her to sit here, facing strangers, and share something so personal. Their judgments from before felt foolish and shallow. The music seemed to grow in confidence, matching the quiet bravery of the little girl. Each note was clear, precise, and filled with emotion. The audience could feel the story moving forward, each chord revealing more than words could ever say. The room no longer felt like a simple hall for entertainment. It felt like a living space, filled with emotion and memory. Some people in the audience began to feel tears in their eyes, though they tried to hide them. The little girl did not play loudly, but the music carried weight. It was honest, strong, and full of life. The melodies, pauses, and rhythms spoke directly to hearts and minds. People began to realize that they had been part of a moment they would remember forever. The girl's focus never wavered. She played as if she were in her own world, yet her music touched every person present. They began to notice small details. The way her fingers curved, the soft press of the keys, the gentle movement of her hands. It was not just playing. It was expression, it was communication, and it was courage. Slowly, a change came over the audience. The laughter that had seemed normal earlier now felt distant, almost inappropriate. They felt a sense of respect building quietly, as if they had witnessed someone transform a space simply by being herself. The girl's small presence filled the room in a way no one had expected. By the time she ended the second short phrase of music, people were no longer thinking about what they expected. They were thinking about what they had felt. They were no longer mocking. They were listening, feeling, and understanding. Something had shifted, and the little girl had done it without words, without explanation, and without a single glance at the audience. And in that silence, the room began to change. The people who had doubted, mocked, or whispered now felt a quiet admiration. They understood that they had misjudged her, that her courage and honesty were far more powerful than they had imagined. They had come expecting entertainment, but what they found was something much deeper. It was the beginning of a story that would stay with them forever, and they all knew it, even if they could not yet explain why. The little girl lifted her hands, ready to continue, unaware of the impact she had already made. The room waited with her, not with doubt, but with expectation. They no longer cared about her age, her size, or her clothes. They cared only about the music, and the story she was telling through it. The music had begun to take control of the room. Every note the little girl played seemed to carry a message, though it had no words. People who had been skeptical or bored now leaned forward, their eyes fixed on her small hands moving across the piano keys. The melody was no longer just a simple tune. It had become a story, each note a sentence, each pause a moment to breathe and reflect. She played with confidence now, though it had not been forced. Every movement was natural, as if the piano were an extension of herself. Her fingers touched the keys lightly but firmly, producing a sound that was both delicate and strong. The room, which had been filled with quiet whispers and soft laughter, was now completely silent, except for the music. Some in the audience felt a shiver run through them. They had expected a child to struggle, to play something clumsy or unsure, and instead they were listening to someone who poured her heart into the music. Even those who had mocked her earlier now looked ashamed. The laughter had disappeared entirely, replaced by awe, curiosity, and respect. The melody shifted slightly, moving from soft and gentle to more determined and bold. Each note seemed deliberate, chosen carefully to convey emotion. The audience could almost see the feelings behind the music. There was joy, a touch of sadness, a spark of hope, and a quiet resilience that spoke louder than words could. Some people found themselves holding their breath, waiting to hear what would come next. A woman near the back wiped her eyes discreetly, startled by how strongly she was feeling. Memories of her own childhood, long forgotten, began to surface, brought back by the purity and honesty of the music. A man sitting quietly in the front row found his chest tightening, as though the little girl had touched something deep inside him. No one wanted to admit that a child could move them so profoundly, yet they could not look away. The little girl's eyes were still closed, her focus completely on the piano. She did not play for the audience. She played because she had to, because the music was part of her. It was a release of everything she had stored inside. Every struggle, every small triumph, every hope she had nurtured quietly over the years. The audience could feel it, even if they could not see it. Some children in the audience watched with wide eyes, feeling a mixture of awe and inspiration. They had not expected to experience anything like this. Their parents noticed their attention, realizing that this was more than a simple performance. It was a lesson, a glimpse into courage and determination that transcended age and skill. The girl's melody continued, growing in complexity and depth. She moved her hands faster, but each note remained clear and purposeful. The music filled the room, wrapping around the listeners and reaching parts of them they had not realized were waiting. Some felt tears forming, though they tried to hide them. Others simply stared, captivated by the beauty and honesty of what they were hearing. The little girl did not rush or show signs of strain. She played naturally, effortlessly blending strength and gentleness. The music carried both her experience and her imagination, creating a story that felt alive. People began to realize that they had misjudged her. She was not just a child at a piano. She was a storyteller, and the piano was her voice. A few adults tried to understand how someone so young could create something so moving. They thought about the hours of practice, the patience, the quiet determination it must have taken. They imagined her sitting alone in small rooms, learning, making mistakes, and continuing to play because she loved it. Their earlier judgment now felt shallow and unfair. The room had changed. What had begun as a casual event had turned into an experience that would stay with everyone present. The audience was no longer thinking about what they expected to see. They were feeling what was being shared through music. Each note, each pause, and each gentle movement of the girl's hands spoke louder than any words could. It was impossible to ignore the truth in what she was playing. The melody became more expressive, flowing in a way that seemed almost alive. Some people closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. They were not just listening. They were participating in the story, feeling each emotion the little girl poured into the piano. Others sat in stunned silence, unsure of how to react but unwilling to look away. The girl's small body seemed to grow larger in presence as she played. The piano no longer felt too big for her. She had become one with it. The audience felt it too, as if the room itself had shifted to accommodate the energy she was creating. The music filled every corner, touching everyone in a unique, personal way. Some people tried to anticipate the next note, the next chord, but the girl played with a freedom that kept them guessing. There was no pretense, no attempt to impress, only honesty and courage. The audience realized that this was what had been missing in so many performances they had seen before. Truth, emotion, and a fearless connection to the music. A few people in the back quietly whispered apologies to themselves, recognizing that they had judged too quickly. The laughter that had seemed harmless before now felt like a mistake, a misunderstanding of the power of authenticity. They realized that what they were witnessing was rare, something that went beyond entertainment and touched the soul. The girl's fingers danced across the keys, moving from one emotion to another seamlessly. Some notes were sharp and bold, expressing strength and determination. Others were soft and gentle, expressing vulnerability and hope. The audience felt the journey of her story, as if the piano itself were speaking directly to each person individually. By now, the people who had come expecting a casual performance had been transformed. They were no longer observers. They were participants, feeling every rise and fall of the melody, every pause that held unspoken emotion. The little girl had captured their attention completely, leaving no room for doubt or distraction. A woman in the middle of the room took a deep breath, overwhelmed by the feeling of being so connected to something beyond herself. A man near the corner felt an unexpected lump in his throat, realizing that he had been wrong to dismiss the child at the piano. Even the children in the audience seemed to sense the power of what was happening, their eyes wide and unblinking as they absorbed every note. The girl's playing became even more confident, more fluid. Her hands moved with grace, yet each note carried weight and meaning. The audience was mesmerized, caught in the beauty of the music, unable to look away. Some felt tears welling up, though they did not move. Others simply sat in quiet amazement, feeling privileged to witness something so rare. The room had become a space of shared emotion, a place where every person present was affected by the courage and honesty of a little girl and her piano. The music had created a connection between them all, a bond that did not require words. They were part of the story, part of the journey, even if only for a few minutes. The girl continued to play, completely immersed in the music. She did not notice the audience, the room, or the reactions around her. She only felt the piano, the notes, and the story she wanted to tell. And in doing so, she had transformed the entire room, changing their hearts and minds in ways they could not yet fully understand. By the time she finished the third section of her performance, the room was completely still. No one breathed loudly, no one moved, no one whispered. All eyes were on her, but not in judgment. They were filled with respect, admiration, and a deep sense of being moved. The little girl had taken them on a journey, and they had followed willingly, captivated by her courage, talent, and honesty. Even though she had not spoken a word, the audience felt as if they had learned something profound. They had witnessed bravery, perseverance, and the power of expressing oneself without fear. The music had done more than entertain. It had touched hearts, reminded people of their own stories, and left them quietly reflecting on what they had just experienced. And in that moment, the little girl, with her small hands and quiet determination, had become more than just a performer. She had become a storyteller, a teacher, and a source of inspiration. The piano was no longer just an instrument. It was a bridge, connecting her to every person in the room, leaving an impression that would linger long after the last note was played. The melody continued to flow from the little girl's fingers, and the room seemed to transform with every note. The music carried a depth that no one in the audience had expected. Some people felt it as a gentle pull, like memories brushing against their hearts. Others felt it as a wave, strong and sudden, stirring emotions they had tried to ignore for years. No one had anticipated that a child could move them so completely with a piano. The girl's hands moved confidently, yet softly, across the keys. Each chord was deliberate, each pause meaningful. The audience could feel her story emerging through the music, though they had no words to describe it. Some of them closed their eyes, allowing the melody to wash over them, to bring out feelings they had not recognized in themselves. The room was no longer a simple hall. It had become a space filled with shared emotion. As she played, the music shifted, carrying a sense of longing, as though she were speaking of things that had been lost or forgotten. The audience sensed it too, their breaths catching in their throats. They realized that this was not just about skill or performance. It was about expressing something real, something deeply personal that could only be understood through feeling. Some of the adults tried to maintain their composure, but the music made it impossible. A man who had been skeptical from the start now found tears in his eyes, though he blinked rapidly to hide them. A woman tried to discreetly wipe her own tears, realizing that what she felt was a mixture of empathy and admiration. They had judged her too soon, and now they were witnessing a young girl reveal a truth they had not anticipated. The little girl's melody carried contrasting emotions. Some notes were soft, almost fragile, telling of vulnerability and uncertainty. Others were strong, bold, and commanding, speaking of courage and determination. The audience felt the push and pull of these emotions, like waves coming and going, leaving them breathless and thoughtful. Children in the audience sat perfectly still, sensing that they were witnessing something extraordinary. No one spoke. No one moved except to adjust themselves quietly in their seats. The audience's attention was entirely captured by the music. Every pause, every subtle change in the notes, seemed deliberate and meaningful. They began to realize that they had been part of something rare and beautiful, something that could not be easily described, only felt. The little girl did not notice their reactions. She was lost in the piano, in the story she was telling through each chord, each soft trill, each subtle rise and fall of the melody. Her focus was absolute. She played not for approval, not for praise, but because she needed to, because the music was a part of her being. And that authenticity resonated with everyone listening. Some people began to imagine her life outside the room, imagining quiet hours spent practicing alone, mistakes made, and moments of triumph. They pictured her determination, her patience, and the quiet bravery it took to sit here in front of strangers and pour her heart into her music. Their earlier judgments now seemed shallow and unfair. They had expected a simple performance, and instead they were witnessing courage and honesty manifested in sound. The girl's music carried a sense of narrative. The audience could feel it building, growing, taking them along a journey of emotions. Some notes spoke of sorrow, while others spoke of hope and joy. They felt the story rise and fall, gentle at times, powerful at others. The room seemed alive, each listener caught in a delicate balance between their own thoughts and the emotions conveyed by the music. A few people looked around at the faces of those near them. They noticed the tears, the quiet expressions of wonder, and the unspoken understanding shared among the audience. For a moment, words were unnecessary. The music had created a shared experience, uniting everyone in a feeling too deep for conversation. Even the children, who often lost focus quickly, were completely absorbed. Their wide eyes reflected curiosity, admiration, and inspiration. They sensed the courage it took for the little girl to perform in front of so many, and they felt her confidence, determination, and authenticity radiating through the music. In that moment, the audience recognized that they were witnessing a rare and valuable lesson on bravery and honesty. The little girl's melody shifted again, softer now, drawing attention to the subtler parts of the story. Her fingers danced lightly over the keys, expressing vulnerability, reflection, and delicate emotion. The audience was silent, listening intently, feeling as if the music were speaking directly to them. They realized that what they had witnessed earlier as a simple child's performance had grown into something deeply moving. Some adults reflected on their own experiences, the struggles and hardships they had faced. They recognized the bravery it took to continue despite fear or doubt, and they felt connected to the courage the girl demonstrated without realizing it. The music had bridged the gap between her life and theirs, conveying lessons about resilience, honesty, and self-expression without a single word being spoken. The melody grew stronger again, bold and confident, demonstrating triumph and hope. The audience could feel the energy in the room shift, the weight of previous doubts and judgments lifting. They had been wrong to expect entertainment alone. Instead, they were experiencing transformation. The girl had not only played music, she had changed the atmosphere, touched hearts, and inspired a roomful of people through her authenticity. Some people wiped tears from their eyes, unsure whether they were crying from sadness, joy, or admiration. The feelings were complex, layered, and undeniable. The little girl continued to play, unaware of the emotional impact she had created. She did not need recognition or applause. She played because the music was her voice, her expression, her way of telling a story that could not be spoken. The room had become a place of reflection and shared emotion. The audience was connected in ways they had not anticipated. Each person carried their own memories and feelings, yet all were influenced by the little girl's courage and honesty. The music was no longer a performance. It had become a living experience, unique to each listener yet shared by all. As the melody continued, the little girl's story deepened. Some notes were playful, teasing, and light, while others were serious and introspective. The audience felt every shift, every change in tone, as if the piano itself were narrating a story of life, struggle, and hope. They understood that they were witnessing not just skill, but a message, a glimpse into a young life filled with determination and emotion. The little girl's focus never wavered. She was completely absorbed in the music, unaware of the eyes upon her, unaware of the effect she had on the room. She only knew the piano, the notes, and the story she needed to tell. And through that honesty, she had captured the attention, admiration, and hearts of everyone present. By the time she reached the fourth section of her performance, the room was transformed. The initial laughter, the whispers of disbelief, and the doubt had vanished. They had been replaced with quiet awe, deep respect, and a sense of being moved in ways they had not expected. The little girl had become more than just a child at a piano. She had become a messenger of emotion, courage, and authenticity. People in the audience realized that this moment was rare and precious. They understood that what they were hearing was not only music, but the expression of life experience, determination, and personal truth. The music spoke directly to their hearts, reminding them of the power of honesty, bravery, and vulnerability. They had come expecting entertainment, and they had received something far more meaningful. The girl's hands moved with grace, strength, and precision. Every note carried intention and emotion, and the audience could feel it resonating deeply. They had been skeptical, judgmental, and distracted before, but now, they were fully present, caught in the beauty of a story told without words, a story told with courage, love, and authenticity. As the music swelled, the audience began to understand the lesson without needing it explained. It was not about applause, recognition, or perfection. It was about expression, courage, and the willingness to share oneself fully, without fear of judgment. And in that room, filled with the sound of piano and the hearts of people changed forever, they felt a shared gratitude for having witnessed something truly extraordinary. The final section of the melody began quietly, almost like a whisper, as if the little girl wanted to tell the audience one last secret before the music ended. Her fingers moved lightly, gracefully, expressing a softness that contrasted with the strength she had shown earlier. The audience felt a sense of anticipation, as though they were about to witness the conclusion of something significant, something beyond simple performance. People held their breath, waiting for the last notes. The room was filled with quiet emotion. Some felt tears forming again, not just from the beauty of the music, but from understanding the courage it took for a child to share something so personal. The little girl's hands moved confidently, yet gently, as if she were speaking directly to each person in the room. Every chord, every pause, carried meaning, and the audience understood that the story was coming to its end. Her eyes remained closed, her focus entirely on the piano. She did not look for approval, nor did she expect praise. The music was her expression, her voice, and through it, she had communicated more than words ever could. Each note now seemed to float in the air, holding the room in a delicate balance between emotion and silence. People felt their hearts connected in a way they had never expected, bound together by the honesty and vulnerability of a child. The last few notes approached, softer now, lingering longer than usual. The girl's fingers moved deliberately, pressing each key with intention and care. The audience felt the pause between notes as deeply as the notes themselves. It was as if time had slowed, giving everyone a moment to absorb the impact of what they had just experienced. They had come expecting entertainment, and instead they had received a lesson in courage, authenticity, and the power of expression. Some people tried to hold back their emotions, but the room was too full, the music too powerful. Tears ran quietly down faces, and some people brushed their hands against their lips to hide soft sobs. Others simply sat in awe, realizing that they had been part of something rare and unforgettable. The little girl's performance had changed them, not just for the evening, but in ways that would remain with them for years. The final note was held longer than anyone expected. It resonated in the room, echoing softly against the walls, leaving a space of silence that felt alive and full of meaning. No one moved, no one spoke, not wanting to break the fragile moment that had been created. It was as if the note carried all the stories, all the emotions, and all the courage of the little girl, and now it hung in the air, touching every person present. When the note finally faded, there was a pause, a silence that spoke louder than applause. People looked around, seeing the emotions reflected on each other's faces. They had underestimated her at first, judged her by her size, her age, and her appearance. Now, they understood that her strength had been in her honesty, her courage, and her ability to express herself through music. Slowly, the first claps began, tentative at first, as people tried to find their voices again. Then, one by one, the room erupted in applause, some standing, some sitting, all moved by what they had witnessed. The little girl stood, her small hands clasped together, bowing slightly. She did not smile broadly, but there was a quiet dignity in her expression, a calm satisfaction that came from knowing she had shared her story fully and honestly. People continued to clap, some with tears still in their eyes, some unable to stop the emotion welling up inside them. They had come expecting to see a child perform, and instead, they had been part of something transformative. The music had broken through expectations, laughter, and doubt, leaving only understanding, admiration, and a sense of shared humanity. Some adults reflected on their own behavior, realizing how quickly they had judged and how shallow that judgment had been. They had expected a simple, perhaps amusing moment, and instead they had been confronted with courage and authenticity. They had learned a lesson in humility, in empathy, and in the power of witnessing someone express themselves fully, without fear. The little girl slowly walked away from the piano, her steps measured, calm, and quiet. She did not look back, though she could feel the attention on her. She knew that the music had spoken for her, that it had said more than words ever could. And as she left the stage area, the audience continued to feel the resonance of her performance, the impact lingering in their hearts. A few people whispered to each other, sharing their feelings and interpretations of what they had just heard. Others sat silently, still absorbing the emotional weight of the experience. It was clear to everyone that the evening had changed them in ways they could not immediately describe, but would carry with them forever. They had witnessed something rare. A child expressing herself fully, unafraid of judgment, and touching the hearts of many. Even after the clapping and standing ovations ended, the room felt different. The energy had shifted, replaced by a quiet reverence. People spoke softly, some discussing the technical brilliance, others focusing on the emotion, but all acknowledging the courage and authenticity of the young performer. They realized that what they had seen was more than music. It was a statement of bravery and honesty, a reminder of the power of expression. Some audience members found themselves reflecting on their own lives, their own moments of hesitation and fear. They remembered times when they had held back, when they had judged too quickly, or when they had doubted themselves. The little girl's performance had shown them that courage could come from anyone, anywhere, and that authenticity had the power to touch people deeply. The final note, though long faded, continued to resonate in their minds. They remembered the quiet confidence, the delicate touch, and the bold strength of her hands on the piano keys. They remembered the emotion, the vulnerability, and the honesty that had poured from her small frame. And they understood, in that moment, that they had been part of a rare experience, a lesson in courage, resilience, and the human capacity for empathy. As the audience slowly began to leave, many carried with them more than memories of a performance. They carried a renewed understanding of the power of music, the bravery of expressing oneself, and the impact that honesty could have on others. They had come expecting a casual evening, and they left with hearts touched, minds awakened, and a story that would remain with them forever. The little girl had sat quietly in the audience before her turn, underestimated by all. They had laughed, judged, and whispered, never imagining the depth and courage she would reveal through her music. In the end, it was not the performance alone that mattered. It was the authenticity, the honesty, and the bravery of a child willing to share herself fully. The last note had left them in tears, but also in admiration, respect, and a deep sense of being part of something extraordinary. And that was the story that remained, long after the piano was silent, and the little girl had walked away.